I don't know. It's Challenge Cup weekend, and it doesn't feel like it's a build-up that we'd normally have.
No, not at all.
Are you saying this is not normal? This is abnormal normality?
I'm really looking forward to the game. I think he's got loads going for it, but I just wish there weren't matches this week in the lead up to it.
It's weird, isn't it?
I mean, the podcast is starting now. Seeing as we started talking, we may as well keep talking about Rugby League. 4020 not live, 12th of October. We should be looking back on a weekend of grand finals and looking forward to a test series against the Aussies and moaning about, what do we usually moan about this time of year? Oh, Leeds winning. Yeah.
Leeds coming from the dark.
Yeah.
Take everything.
They've won the grand final again, and we're still might happen. Still might happen in the top four.
Will happen. It will.
Oh, can you imagine that? November grand final. November 20. When they said it on the telly the other night, November 28th, I was like, oh, I'm glad I probably sat at home watching it on telly and not at Old Trafford.
Well, it's about getting your thermals out now if you're there, and for all of you guys.
That's well, because clearly it's the Challenge Cup final this weekend. If nobody had noticed, and most weekends that is on, even though it may rain during the game, it's normally beautiful and sunny, and it's full of colour and vibrancy. And this weekend it'll probably be snowing because it's not a bank holiday or August or even July when we were supposed to have it, or May when we used to have it. It'll be middle of October.
Yeah, but Leeds do really well with poor weather conditions, so I don't mind that so much.
They can play in the sun.
Oh, look at that.
Oh, look, there's you there in the top corner. Only person in the room.
I'm there. I won't be there on Saturday, but I'm there now. Danika, how are you?
I'm very well. Are you?
I think last time we spoke to you was after Tommy Makinson's extravaganza.
Yeah, that's been a while.
And now he's back. Happy serendipity. He's back in action.
Yeah, it's been a while, and there's been lots of things happening in the world of rugby, but nothing in the women's game.
Apart from the NRL women's.
Yeah, amazing, isn't it? Like, it's so great that you can watch it, and I'm so glad that it's put out there for, because last year it was just on Fox, and you had to download all the deals, and now you can watch it. And how great is it? Like, brilliant.
Have we seen the women's equivalent of the squirrel grip with the hair pull?
Do you know what? Right, because sometimes that is genuinely accidental, and so you can. There's a difference between it being accidental and it being on purpose. And when it's on purpose, there's a clear reach and grab. When it's accidental, it just is, because if somebody's you just get caught up in the motion, don't you? So it is. I don't know if it's. Yeah, it could potentially be a similar thing.
Shouldn't that be classed as a high tackle?
It's illegal anyway. You can't pull somebody's hair.
Well, yeah, I've not thought of that. I don't
Surely.
know. I mean, I'm like all those people on social media on a weekend who slag off the referees for making decisions.
What would happen if somebody was wearing a scrum cap and somebody grabbed hold of a finger in the scrum back and pulled it back? Like, what would happen then? Because surely that's similar.
I think she's been charged anyway. Because there was significant injury caused by it. It wasn't just a hair pull. It was then yanking her opponent backwards over her leg. And anyway. And we know
if you've had your hair pulled, it literally is like whiplash. Your body's still going forward.
I'd love to have my hair pulled.
I mean, during my illustrious playing career at school, I did have long hair, but I was never on the pitch long enough to, or have the ball long enough to get pulled by the hair, sadly. But there you go. I'm trying to think. Did anything in particular exciting happen? I mean, all the games were good, weren't they? Apart from OK Catalans, which no one saw. The games were all good at the weekend. And it just, I have got this feeling about that everything's just, we're floating along. I know we're supposed to go, everything's great, yeah. But we know the reasons for the game. They all just seem to be floating along, and it's nice. It's on the telly. It distracts us from watching repeats of something else. But nothing seemed to happen at the weekend of any great importance, unless I've forgotten something.
I mean, what's bizarre is we're not playing rugby on the weekends, so it's all Thursday, Friday. And normally we'd have sort of the Championship League One to fill in over. There would be rugby results to look out for, and at the moment, because we're now all playing again tomorrow and later in the week, there isn't a huge amount of point going over the games that have been played because they're coming thick and fast. But what I would say is Warrington Wigan was a fantastic game. The quality of that, bearing in mind again that both sides were coming off severe disappointment of Challenge Cup semi-final defeats. I thought a typical Wigan performance, just gutsy, hanging there long enough to pinch it at the end, but real high quality game between the two. But Wakefield deserved a lot of credit for the way they played against St Helens. I think that was a bit of a turnaround game for a lot of Wakefield fans who were saying, all we want to see is effort. Well, might not have quite done enough to win it, but huge amount of effort took Saints all the way. And again, Hollu stepped in at very short notice, last minute to play Leeds with a number of players out for various reasons and put up a really creditable performance. So I just, it was a round where another set of matches were played to suit our broadcast partners. The players are absolutely exemplary at the moment. I think the one thing that clearly is lacking is any degree of atmosphere, and the longer that goes on, the harder it is for the players to perform. But if you're fortunate enough to be live in a stadium, and I use that word fortunate deliberately because I just think anybody who is allowed in a stadium at the moment is incredibly privileged, and we don't take that lightly. The sound of bone upon bone is just unbelievable at the moment. When you think that the majority of these players don't actually have anything to play for, then taking pay cuts to do what they do, the actual physical toll that they're taking on each other is massive. And if I was wearing a hat, can't see a hat, I would take it off and put it on and put it back on again in tribute to them all. I think we can debate who's wearing the league tail, but the truth is all the players are heroes at the moment.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things, because I was really lucky to do the BBC Super League show the other week, and I wasn't quite sure what to expect. I was not nervous, that's not the right way to say it, but I didn't know what to expect and how it would be, because I've obviously never been to a Super League game without a crowd. But I thought the most interesting thing, and I don't know if it's from a player's point of view, was the communication you could hear as well. So I think the Saints game, every single player was calling where they were, what they were doing. And I think that was the difference between the sides. Good communication. And I said Lachlan Coote is like a conductor. Everybody in St Helens knows their role and knows what piece they need to play in the orchestra. And then Lachlan Coote was at the back just shouting constantly in attack, in defence. And it was just incredible. Yeah, the hits are completely different. And James Graham is a bully, isn't he? He was just...
He snarled.
Getting the ball. Yeah, I think it was... Jimmy McGilvery was coming in the middle for quite a lot of balls. He was like, Jez is mine. I was like, I will just give you the ball and lick it. But it was great to hear that, I think. And that was a different point. Like, the difference in the two winning sides that night was communication. And yeah, it was incredible as a player to hear that.
I think that goes back to something you mentioned last week, Phil, about the fake crowd noise on the telly. If you are given that option, I know it kind of adds to things. And it was great on... It was almost a novelty. When it started on Fox, when the NRL came back, and look, it's a novelty. It's like a pretend crowd, and it works. But now I would prefer to hear the players. I know there's obvious problems with Sky would have to apologise every 2 seconds for someone swearing because, God forbid anyone hears a word they've, never heard before. Industrial language, I believe they call it. But it would be interesting for the layman like myself who, I mentioned I played at school, but I was no good. Just to get that insight into what actually goes on the pitch. And I think you get a greater understanding of what the role players take on during the game.
I think that's the point, that first of all, stick a parental advisory warning in the top corner and then you're covered if anybody swears. But I think that there's an authenticity about what we're seeing at the moment. It's pared down to exactly what the sport is all about, the qualities that are inherent in it, that the players exemplify in the way that they show respect for each other, and the skill level that the toughness, all of that comes out if you don't have a fake crowd noise. And I think you're right that in terms of getting used to this unusual situation, which is now clearly going to go on for at least the remainder of this season, it made sense. But I think Sky have turned it down a bit. But I wouldn't mind now if it wasn't there at all, because I think we know that, if Hull are on the attack and you hear strains of Old Faithful, there's nobody in the ground, there's something really fake about that now. But what I do like is the communication also between the referees and the players, because I don't think the referees have had enough credit at this time. Not only have they had to adapt to new rules, and obviously that's happened in season, so it's not like they could go away and practice what it was going to look like, maybe take some pre-season games and operationally come up with how they were going to interpret things, because that's what it is. There's no hard and fast rule that says 6 again is because of A, B, and C. It's a referee's decision whether the player's been slowed down or not. So each referee will interpret it slightly differently. So to have done that, but the other night when James Graham's head was split open, and Ben Thaler was screaming to him, "Don't touch your face!" That's the kind of stuff that you want to hear. The relationship there is between them, and it was almost like they were back at school on the school playing fields, and Headmaster Thaler was saying, "Don't pick your nose," and it was. I love stuff like that. I think that's where the true essence of the sport comes out. You don't need to hide that with fake noise. We had cardboard cutouts because we weren't used to how the ground would look with nobody in it. We don't have them anymore. Nobody said, "Oh, it's not the same experience because there aren't fake people in the stadium." Let's take the fake noise away. Let's see it for what it is. Let's see which players are really vociferous. The ones that you might not think they are, that take that team around. Let's see what Luke Gale's value is to Leeds, other than his kicking game, because he is the guy, along with Richie Mile, that just makes sure the best is coming out of everybody else. And that's a skill that we don't appreciate and normally get the chance to look at. I'm with you. Let's pare it back to what it actually is.
Yeah, and then you've also got the element of things like Louis McCarthy-Scarsbrook. I think he made a mistake against Huddersfield and held his hands up when Owen Trout scored and said, "That was my fault, that was my fault, the next try's mine." And I think it's also that, for me, the sportsmanship and the team kind of cohesion they've got. I think it's quite difficult on the pitch to admit when something's your fault, especially when the pressure's on. I mean, it wasn't really on for Saints in that respect, but, to pull your hands up, I think that shows like another side of them as athletes as well. Like, when you've made a mistake, are you big enough to say, "Yeah, that was mine, really sorry, the next try's mine"? And he went and got the next try, from that. And that was, and that conversation, not just about the plays and how things work, but as people, like people get a different opinions. We've seen them all on Twitter about what people think about certain players. But I think hearing them speak and how they conduct themselves, not just about the game, but around their performance individually, it was fantastic. And I think that's another thing that would be great for people to hear. They are human. They do make mistakes, but they do try and rectify those on the pitch. But you just don't see that because Louis' way of he's quite a brash man, isn't he? People think he's just but he apologised to his whole team and said, "I'm really sorry, I'll go again." And I think that's a great side. So, yeah, I'm definitely with you both. But I don't know that'll happen.
Not to generalise about Millwall fans, but there you go. You could see on Friday's game how frustrated he was with Saints' performance, because when he got that try towards the end, you could see how much it meant to him to actually do something positive for the team. Who'd obviously, I can't say they went into that game thinking they'd won it from when Chris Chester said, "Wait for them, only got 17 players and most of them are injured." But you could tell that he at least was frustrated with the efforts of his teammates, or I assume he was during that game, with how he reacted for that try.
I think that's a huge thing, isn't it, though? Because if you go into a game, and I think we've done it a couple of times, I mean, obviously completely different scale, but you go into a game thinking that you've already won it, it becomes, your foot's off the gas, you don't do the plays properly, it gets a bit of white line fever, people tend to step up when they necessarily wouldn't step up and try and do their own thing, and there's and it comes a little bit disjointed. And like I said, literally a couple of minutes ago, Saints, when they're playing well, are like an orchestra and everyone knows their role. Whereas there, it did look a little bit deer in headlightsy, but not that they weren't organised, just other people trying to step up, because I guess they assumed that the score would be not as tight as it was.
I think everybody in any team environment, in fact, probably any work environment, will have days where they're just not quite on it, and to expect a 100% level of intensity and performance every single week is never going to happen. And the fact that it doesn't is a good thing, because otherwise every result will be predictable and there'd never be any point going to a match. And there's going to be times in the season where sides are caught. And it won't be lack of preparation. It won't be lack of desire or attitude. It'll just be that for whatever reason, they're off it that week. It could be fatigue. It could be cumulative injury. It could be not being able to train. It could just be that a star player, isn't having a star day. But how you cope with that is really interesting. And I think seeing teams grit and graft their way out when they're not playing well, whether at the top of the league or the bottom of the league, is really interesting as well at this time. And you can see that some teams have got that inherent belief in them, that even if it's not going their way, they've got some processes and things that they can fall back on that normally work for them. And Saints did that certainly against Wakefield, and that was partly down to the brilliant Wakefield smothering defence in the first half an hour, particularly on the halfbacks. I mean, they'd clearly done a lot of work that said, we looked at what Warrington did to get over St Helens in a couple of big games, one at Wembley last year and one the other week in the quarter final. And if we can get in the face of Johnny Lomax and Theo Farge early and stop the ball going out to the fast men outside, if we can at least gang tackle Alex Walmsley in the middle of the field to stop them getting momentum, and it's easy to say that's what you got to do, but actually doing it over the full 80 minutes is really hard. But Wakefield did it for the first half hour, and again, just seeing St Helens find a way to get out of that. Wigan were, I think somebody may have said on the commentary that a boxing match after 70 minutes, you'd have awarded the points to Warrington. You said they're so far ahead on the judges' card, there's no point having the last round. But Wigan hung in there, and sometimes that's more exciting than a 27-28 brilliant 5-try, superbly crafted game. But you get to see so much more of that when you can hear what they're saying. And how they cope with stuff like that, and I'm not saying that we're enjoying this at the moment, and certainly the sympathy for every single fan that desperately wants to be in the stadium to watch it on a screen instead. But we are seeing some things, if we want to have a look at them, that normally we wouldn't get access to, and that's for me what's certainly what's keeping us going.
Yeah, for sure. That's the thing, isn't it? It's about this whole, Hull KR binding out that win a few weeks ago. It's about that what's happened the day and the time, and things like the youngsters coming in tomorrow for Leeds to play. Like, what a great opportunity it is for them to step up and play a Super League game, whether it's for them to prevent other players from playing and look for the weekend or not. They're still getting this opportunity now. So I think, as rubbish as it is with the terms of there's no crowds, there's we can't go watch, the women are not playing or whatever, there are, in a weird way, some opportunities coming up, and it's testing teams and coaches in a way that it never ever would before. Like you say, Chris Chester hasn't got any players left to play with, but yet they're going out and he's problem solving, or he's being solution focused, or however you want to look at it. That's not something a coach will ever have to really think about, would it, in a normal season or whatever? So, unless it's a really unfortunate one. But I think that's this is the new norm, isn't it? This is what is normal now, and it will be until the end of the season anyway, and for the foreseeable. But you've got to take with it the small gains and the small wins, haven't you? And that's what it's bringing for teams and squads. So there's something positive. It's
also why we should be more tolerant of playing performances, and particularly coaches, because again, Ian Watson was on the press conference call for previewing Wembley, and in some respects, because he's such a focused guy, he doesn't even really want to talk about Wembley because his team are playing tomorrow.
Yeah,
we don't appreciate any of that. You know, what's the build-up going to be like? Well, I've got a game to focus on first, and you know, we're asking 100% performance and excellence all the time, without appreciating the circumstances that they've got to train and play under, and cobble a team together, and do opposition previews of, and look at practice, and not have rehab, and not have a prehab in the way that they normally would, and all of that. We just go, oh, they didn't play very well this week, and it's the coach's fault. And I think we've got to be more tolerant.
People just don't see that side of it, though, do they? That's the thing, and it's quite like, away can get it. Like, there's people out there that want to watch their team, they want to watch them win, they want to know what's happening. Like, and the Challenge Cup's a big final. Finally, we've got something to look forward to that's significant. And like you say, people who are interviewing, or the fans, they just don't see the bigger picture, and I think we can't say that that's right or wrong, because one, we've never been in this position before, and two, it's a different mindset, isn't it? Completely. So, but it's also a short turnaround from him getting over the game this week to then focusing on the Saturday. So there must be a limit, and there must be some kind of overlap in the two anyway. But yeah, I'm on massive credit where it's due, because there's a hell of a lot going on with not a lot of time.
I know you say it's different, Danika, but Ian Watson saying it's just another game on Saturday. I think Richard Ago, said similarly. Could just say things like that. Oh, it's just another game. I know. Yeah, they have to wear a suit instead of a tracksuit, and they have to line up, and there's a national anthem. Blah 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 blah. Just another game. Before finals, as a player, and obviously you've had a few in the last couple of years. Is it always just another game?
I think that. I mean, that's been said to me so many times, and it is just another game, because in essence, apart from the team you're playing, so Leeds, Salford, when you do that bit of analysis about the teams, your game plan is essentially the same. You run the same plays, but you might run them at different times. You might adjust them to certain plays, but generally you've got a playbook, and that playbook doesn't really change. You might just choose to switch some out for others depending on how the opposition operate. But yeah, there's a lot of build-up, and I think this time's going to be very different, because you have got the build-up, and you are going to Wembley, and it is a final, and of course you want to win, but is it just another game because you're going to another empty stadium that's just a little bit bigger? Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm gutted for them, in the sense that there's some lads in that Leeds team particularly that have never been to a final, and I know, like, I've been to finals, but playing in a final, and even having 4,000 people at the end of a game, how much better that was than the year previous playing in Heworth, where it was down one little side. It does make a huge difference. But yeah, the way you prep for it is the same, apart from you might have your food a little bit of a different time, the way that you manage yourself. Everyone's got their game day routines and everything like that. So you have to think of it as another game, in the sense that if you get too overstimulated, anxious or whatever, you're going to throw your game out as an individual, and not just as a team. So it is another game with a little bit more on offer at stake. But yeah, you do try to keep it.
I reckon that there's the difference between the build-up and the pre-game, and obviously the post-game, if you've won all the celebrations and laps of honour and all that kind of thing, and the actual in-game. Because players that you speak to and you've asked about this are saying that once that ball is kicked off, if you're doing your job properly, you're focused on is the green bit that's in front of you. And whilst there's a backdrop, all that means as well is that you're trying harder to communicate, because you can't hear each other because of the wall of sound. But not having a crowd there doesn't stop you playing. It just makes the circumstances of preparing when you're warming up and there's nobody shouting and there's nobody cheering. And I think what's going to be interesting with this Wembley is we've got two coaches. I think we said this when we knew who was going to be in the final, that will make it a sense of occasion. They both appreciate and understand exactly what this competition means, not only to them and their players, but to the clubs that they represent. So for Salford, it's building on the back of a grand final. It's, well, a whole generation of fans, even if they're sitting at home, have not seen us in this position before. It's a lot of players who are going out there with a point to prove. They've got a lot of experience, and there's some real internationals in that lineup as well. But generally, they tend to be players that have been let go by other clubs because they thought that perhaps the job that they could do was ended. So they've got that. Whereas Leeds have got this. We know the history of the club. We know that what's expected of the club. We know where the club's been in a very recent past, and we know where we're trying to get it to now. And I think both of those coaches have been absolutely front and centre in taking them to where they are this weekend, and they will get that over to their players, and they'll respect that, and that's important because they'll both say to their teams from again what we can gather is that this could be the only time that this final is played in these circumstances. So these 34 players are losing something, but they're also gaining something. They are going to be the only ones that will ever have experienced a cup final played in this manner. So it's still a cup final, but they're actually in a very privileged position rather than it being something they should be bemoaning that they haven't got. What will be really interesting is that it's a very wide pitch. It's an energy sapping pitch. And I think the tactics are going to be absolutely vital as to how you cope with all of that. And for the first time for a long time, I think Salford have got a little bit more experience of players that have played in a big game in that stadium than Leeds have.
Yeah, so definitely. Yeah.
It's a really intriguing, exciting final that's got lots of stories and even tactical things attached to it, and I think it's the one that the game needs and wants at the moment. If the BBC are giving us 4.5 hours on primetime television, which includes the build up, the game itself, they're giving a proper analysis afterwards. It's not here's the cup now, final score, thank you very much. Then I think we've got potentially the right game to get a lot of people talking about rugby league.
Yeah, it's going to be different, but I think being different makes it more unique as well, doesn't it? Because we have got that as as spectators to look forward to. So yeah, it's going to be so interesting. But I see what I was thinking about that Salford thing and the amount of players that Salford have got now that are not used to it but have experience in it. Because I think Leeds have got quite a few young players that haven't been in finals or haven't even got close to them in recent years. So is that going to play a big part, or is not having the crowds going to not affect it as much? How does it work? Interesting. It will be interesting.
I think everyone's looking forward to this. And like, where do you see the key battles on the pitch being then?
Kevin Brown, Gale.
Yeah, I was about to say the halves. Because I think last time we saw Luke Gale in a final, he would really admit himself he probably wasn't on form. Whereas now I think he's playing brilliantly. Like you say, Kev Brown, there's, an abundance of talent that have, like you said before, switched clubs and maybe not been wanting elsewhere and now in a final. So I think the halves will be a really good showdown.
I think Joey Lussick and Cruz Leeming again will be a really interesting battle. Lussick is everything. I think it's written in his contract. I will be going for a dart for the line from close in at some point in the game. You must allow me to do that. And more times than not, it's at a very crucial point in the game. He scores a try and it's won it for them on a lot of occasions. He is such a hard-working guy, and you cannot take your eye off him for a moment because you know what he's going to do, but knowing that somebody's going to do it and stopping him doing it are two different things. And I think Leeming's, again, very early in his career at a new club and didn't have a pre-season, but he's having a greater influence on the team now that he's sort of getting to know the guys around him. So a lot of focus will be on Lola here and Louis and obviously their swap and but I do think that how they get the ball and where on the field they get the ball will determine how effective they are, and that will be down to the hookers and the halfback. And then the really interesting battle adding up front is you've got the gnarled experience of a Lee Mossop and a Gil Dudson, and the raw power of a Mikolaj Oledzki. And I think again that's going to be just a really interesting battle as to who comes out on top of that. And Leeds have got the selection dilemma of who do they play at fullback as well. But to be fair to Watson, he's also saying that probably half of his team are going to back up tomorrow, which again may present him with some selection dilemmas. I'm just hoping that, well, a topic we probably need to talk about is whether Salford and Leeds should be playing this week. Because I would hate for any player to miss out on this occasion for any reason whatsoever, be that injury in a game that they don't need to be playing, or an outbreak of coronavirus positive testing later in the week, which we've seen every single week. And it possibly is more by luck than judgment whether your team is going to be infected or not. And I mean, it's a side thing, but instructions from Wembley Stadium are ridiculously strict, and absolutely rightly so. There's 6 pages of what you've got to read and what tests you've got to do and what the procedure is when you get there. And it's stricter than a normal game. It's the National Stadium. It holds a lot of different sports, and its protocols are higher. But they're virtually asking people who are involved in game day, in whatever capacity, to isolate this week, to not go shopping if you don't have to not mix with people in the run-up to going to their stadium. And yet we're asking our players who are going to be playing to play this week. It seems to be an unnecessary risk. We've got 2 major showpiece occasions this year. As we do every year, but this year they're heightened because if for the season to have any meaning whatsoever, the Challenge Cup final's got to be huge, and what's the point of playing during all of these difficult weeks if the grand final isn't going to mean something either? But we've said that there's a 15-game moratorium on qualifying for the top 4, and virtually, well, some teams are 1 game away from that, and everybody else is going to reach it, whether they play this week or not. So are we taking a ridiculous risk in making Leeds and Salford, once we knew that they were the finalists, play this week? And I think we are. And I just hope that doesn't backfire, particularly if Ian Watson's got to rotate his team to the point where half of those, or 4 or 5 or 6 of those that are playing tomorrow, danger of not making a final because they get an inadvertent injury. Because the one thing Hull KR aren't going to do is go, if you're at Wembley, I'll tell you what, we won't tackle you this week.
But that's the thing, though, isn't it? Because the squad for Leeds for tomorrow, you've got some quite significant players. You've got Jack Walker, Adam, Brad, Cam Smith, who's been doing really well, Tom Holroyd. Like, you've got some significant players who have been playing in the proper first team, but you know what I mean. And who have that. Tom Holroyd's doing brilliantly well. Cam Smith, he's just such a utility player. Again, always steps up. Adam is Adam. Whether he's getting old and people think that or not, he's still a trustworthy forward should you need one. Brad is coming on, he changes the game sometimes. And then is playing Jack giving him game time because he's been off, or is that a precursor to the fact that we're maybe going to go with Richie Myler? I think there's just so many, and not to mention the other lads in there, that there's lots of others, like that are in there as well. But it's quite significant, I think, the players that he's got playing tomorrow that would potentially be either on the bench or in the 18th, 19th man.
Richard Agar said today Tom Holroyd was born with a number 8 on his back, Phil.
Yes, he's branded as when he came out of the womb.
Well, why play him tomorrow then and not save him for Saturday? And my other thing is, doesn't testing happen on a Monday? So should these boys come into contact? Because obviously they did the testing today, they'll get the results tomorrow, I think it is. And then whether they play tomorrow or not, do they then have the next few days and not get tested till the following Monday anyway? So they're going to go back into training with the rest of the guys that are going down to Wembley. Am I looking for something negative there, or is that a valid point?
I just think it wouldn't be an issue if these two teams weren't playing this week. And
well, that's what I mean. That's where I'm going with that.
A potential area of disruption that there doesn't need to be. That would be my point. It's nothing to do with the fact that who the teams are that are in the final. If it was Catalan and Sheffield, it would be exactly the same. Once we know who those teams are, then don't make them play 4 or 5 days before. Don't put them at risk. Don't make coaches have to make decisions to keep squads topped up to 21 names if they want to hold players back for the big occasion. And I think, again, naming guys in a squad doesn't mean they necessarily play this week. And the length of time they play or are taken out of the fray once that, Jack Walker, when he played the other week against Catalan, only played till half time. It wasn't really determining the outcome of that game. It was to give him 40 minutes of bashed by the big Catalan forwards to make sure that he was at a certain level of fitness. And I just think, we don't need to do it. So don't do it. If it's an unusual year where goalposts have changed at least 4 times, let's change them again. And let's ensure that Saturday is the best players out there giving us the very best spectacle.
It does seem to be a risk that doesn't need to be taken, as we saw with Castleford last week. And, well, you can even go to Rugby Union and Sale, can't you, who completely cocked up the end of the Premiership season there for whatever reason, which never seems to be widely reported, but if you read the internet, is interesting. Can you imagine if we get to Saturday and Mark Chapman's out when he says, well, we would have brought you the Challenge Cup final today, but sadly everyone's got COVID, so here's a repeat of 1968 again. Thank you very much. Good night. It's...
I just think the thing we've got to be aware of is exactly where we are as a nation at the moment as well. We're now in tiered various restrictions, whatever that actually means, but we're doing that predominantly in the north of England, and mainly because the rates of infection are going up quite significantly. Now, if that is the case, if this week is the week that we are living in, and some of those facts are incontrovertible, that there are more people in hospitals, then don't take the risk.
Especially when the players have been, can't find the words now, not failing a test, but testing positive for coronavirus, that's it. Through non-rugby activities, the assumption is a lot of people are getting it because kids are back at school and kids are germ magnets. So we aren't a sport rich enough to lock everyone up in cotton wool, are we? That's the problem.
But then to also counteract that, I'm a teacher. I work in a school. We are doing as much as we possibly can to remain safe, to remain As a school, we've had lots of symptoms or gone for we've had no cases in our school, which maybe touch wood is lucky. I don't know what the schools are like necessarily, but using the excuse that kids are back at school isn't the greatest one, in my opinion.
All right, maybe players have been having barbecues again. I don't know. That's just what they say.
No. That's what I know. That's what they're saying, but I'm just playing devil's advocate in the sense that unless I've got no symptoms at all, then I don't think that at all. But it's one of those things, isn't it? Like, unless you have symptoms or you get tested all the time, how do you know?
I just to go back to Mikołaj Leński, could he be the first, the greatest performance by a Pole at Wembley since Jan Tomaszewski, who Phil will remember, and Danika will have no idea what I'm talking about.
The clown.
He's a clown. That Paul is a clown.
I think it's safe to say that by the time some people watch or listen to this podcast, the Polish Rugby League Association will have issued a statement saying how proud they are of what he's doing and how much of a role model he is. The Polish Rugby League has just had their first grand final. The first 4 teams have been formed and are playing, and congratulations to Warsaw Tritons, who beat the Lodge Magpies 2018 in the grand. But the fact is, they're playing. They've got a domestic league. They're on the first rung of the ladder of recognition as a federation. Mikołaj, in some of the things that he's been asked about in the national press, is saying, I really hope that the game can take off in in my homeland is Gdansk born. It's not, solely heritage. He actually, was the first player that was born over there to play in a cup final, and they're going to send that back, saying, we are right behind you, and for young and old players, you really are somebody that we look up to. Whether he plays well or not, I think what we're seeing is the fact that there are spin-offs for this final, and if we're in the NRL, the last regular season round before the playoffs started, a third player of Chilean descent made his NRL debut. I think his name's Daniel Vasquez, and played prop for Cronulla. Now, when all of that is happening, that you feel heartened that we can capitalise on all of this. The World Cup coming up next year with teams like Brazil coming over and playing in the Women's World Cup, and Norway have now got a wheelchair path. They haven't really got government money for the 13-a-side game, but the wheelchair game is getting funding in Norway because they're going to be in a World Cup. And I think if we are clever about all this, and we talk about legacy as though there's a book somewhere you can bring down and go, right, that's how you do it, and that's how you measure it. There is no structured way you can say stuff. But guys like Mikolai playing at Wembley is potentially really big for the sport in Eastern Europe. Yes.
I mean, I saw the article in the Guardian at the weekend about the number of people from BAME minority groups, whatever the phrase was supposed to say, getting involved in rugby league, and how they are compared to the past is Eastern Europe. And I look at my own city of Wakefield. We have lots of Eastern European shops around, and Eastern European people who've come over here in the last 10-15 years have families who come through the schools here. Could they be the next breakthrough group of rugby league players, Danika?
You've got an Estonian prop on the programme.
And it comes from grassroots, doesn't it? It comes from schools. It comes from experiences there, I think. And Mikolai and I always have a bit of a joke that we're the first two Eastern Europeans to play. Well, the two Eastern Europeans to actually play for England instead. Obviously, I'm not, as my heritage is Estonian, but we always have a bit of a joke about that. But it's about, it's all about where it starts, isn't it? And that cliche thing of like, it's all about grassroots level, but it is, unless you get that experience when you're young enough, it's not something you'll get into, especially in a community. And I say this because my family is typically Eastern European in the sense that men do the work and the graft, and the women look after the house, and that's still very much the case these days, regardless of what year we're in. So you've got other things, but could well be the next. He could be the role model for the future talent of Eastern Europe.
I think there's another very interesting question here about wherever the talent comes from. Do we have a pathway? Because I think we discussed it briefly the other week when we had the first midweek round, and we were talking about all these great young players that we were seeing. 19 kids made their debut that round, the round of son of famous father. And there'll be a similar amount in certain teams, clearly, that play this week as well. And as we move on with more and more midweek games, and the fact that the injury toll will mount and the weather will get worse, they will get an opportunity. But where do we go from here? Because unless you have a designated pathway for kids to play regularly, are we at risk of losing them? And if they're not visible, if a young Eastern European who, let's take Wakefield for example, they've got is it a
Turkish international.
Turkey, thank you. I was going to say Greek, but it is. So again, Turkey is at the very, very beginning of introducing rugby league, and Yusuf deserves the chance perhaps to play a couple of games before the end of the season, and will. But when everybody's fit at the beginning of next year, where will he rank? Where will he play? And what will be his perceived career path if we haven't got reserve grade, if we haven't got dual registration? And that concerns me, because as I think Brian Noble says in his column in the new 4020 out this week, had to get the plug in somewhere. You know, and unless you know, you have got more and more young people coming through who are playing the game and given a chance and can see their opportunity, it doesn't really matter what sort of television deal you do, because there'll be nobody playing.
I think that's such a. I know, you know, with the current conditions how they are, yeah, that's the biggest problem, isn't it? That's the biggest worry. And I kind of tied it into the women's game as well. You know, we were trying to get 21,000 women by 2021 playing the sport and being involved, and that comes all the way down to the girls' game and our academy as well. You know, and I don't know where that stands for the women's academy, but there's nothing much that we can do now. You know, the bonus is that we have so many games midweek and the tight turnaround, so that these boys are getting the chance to have a run out, and that's the only thing we can see at the minute, is that's their only opportunity. Because say if, God forbid, that this went on for another year, we'll get to the end of this time next year and we'll have a set of players that have moved on and a loose academy where boys have been interested in moving up, but then we're in fear of like losing the pool of players, aren't we? There's no conveyor belt of boys coming through. So if that doesn't get sorted out soon enough, there will be a spell of we're out of not out of players, we'll never be out of players, but you know what I mean, where they're not moving through. And I don't know what the answer is at the minute because of the situation that's going on. And why has that decision to stop the academies or whatever it is next year, why has that come in already? Why have they been so gung-ho about me? This is the RFL. As much as I love them and they've done lots for me, like why do sometimes you take forever to make a decision and the next one you go straight in with that's it? I don't get it. How? So this time next year there's going to be no games played for reserve grade and be in this predicament of how do we find players?
Well, some clubs have found out in the last couple of weeks they haven't got enough players to fill a squad at the very high level.
And then what's happened to people like, let's say, Featherstone, who have lots of dual registration from Leeds? If they're not allowed to dual register for obvious reasons, how do they then build a squad and go forward? That changes the whole of Featherstone's like squad, doesn't it? And it goes from taking like Alex Sutcliffe came into his own last year playing for them, and you know, it'd be a shame to not have that for the clubs to build as well on. But there's not much I can do about it apart from have a little bit of a whinge and a moan. But let's just hope this is over soon and things get reevaluated.
So it's all part of the, I think we've called it in the past, blank sheet of paper approach, where you put down your 5 or 6 major topics that the game needs to address. And one of them is genuine pathways for young talent. Yeah. And what does that look like? Does it look like feeder clubs? And in which case, what do we mean by a feeder club, and how do clubs retain their identity but get closer perhaps to a Super League club? That, you know, the whole Doncaster relationship that at one stage looked like that was perhaps where we were going, in terms of the senior club puts in the coaching structure, the coach comes from that team, the junior players that don't quite are ready yet for Super League rugby week in, week out, go to an environment where the way that they play is very similar, if not identical, to the way the parent club play, which means you can step between the two organisations. There's coach development as well as player development. You know, what does that mean with regards to promotion relegation? Are you saying that the junior club, for want of a better word, junior as in the non-Super League club, does that mean they can never be promoted? All of this, and I'm not saying there's any answers for it, is what we need to be talking about at the moment, and what it looks like in the future. And you know, do we move from having academies at individual clubs to academy centres of excellence? So, you know, the northeast, the northwest regions have academies, and the best players from the clubs emerge from those or are fed back down into those, and the standard of competition overall is higher. and there's some kind of a draft system whereby players get then allocated to clubs at an age where they all of that. And I'm not saying there's a ready-made answer and there isn't a one-size-fits-all, but unless we're planning something on that basis, then there's a 16-year-old kid who has come through the Welsh development system, and I have to say, hats off to Wales. They seem to be doing a lot of things right in the way that they've got their pathways set up, and that's producing loads of real talent, like the Regan Graces, who was picked up by St Helens at a very young age, and look at him now, arguably one of the most exciting players in the game. There's a 16-year-old kid that's following that same path, who we haven't heard of, who's just signed for Hull. Now, are we doing that right, where just an individual player can be picked off a conveyor belt, or should we say, let's have a Welsh centre of excellence, and let's find some way of getting the best kids in Wales playing against each other on a more regular basis, and the kids in Wales then play the combined Northwest, which is the best that Wigan and St Helens can be. Yeah, I don't know. All I'm saying is this should be on that piece of paper that says we want more international rugby windows. We need to look at whether promotion relegation works. We need to look at, if we had a licensing system, how that would work. We need to look at retaining our best kids and giving them opportunity. For me, this is a real vital part of who we're going to be emerging out of the coronavirus situation.
But then I understand what you're saying. I get that. But then are we not, are the RFL just not trying to get to the end of the season and play constant catch up with games or with testing or however it's running? I think in terms of thinking about stuff going forward, I think there's a fine line between making sure that what's happening here and now is, like in terms of like they don't have to worry about the academies, they don't have to worry about the women's game, they don't have to worry about the community game as such now, or the championship. They're just focusing on trying to get through the Super League with the Challenge Cup and a grand final, and whatever things are stirring up from there. And then coming the end of November, sit, regroup, and then is that time to rethink the whatever's going on. I don't know.
Well, there's operational and strategic, and they can be running along parallel to each other. But I think
they can be, but are they?
It raises the question of all of those areas that we just talked about. Do you have to have uniformity? Can you possibly have two different bodies, if you like, responsible for different parts of the game, trying to put that strategic view together, and that brings back to the point of what's happening in football at the moment, and I don't know enough detail, and I certainly don't know the rights and wrongs, but again, the Premier League and the EFL, or a small part of the Premier League and the EFL, don't seem to have a clear idea of what the sport should look like. They both want things out of it that are almost mutually exclusive. Now, clearly I'm not comparing us to them, because we don't have the same level of resource that they do, but the danger of having two different bodies looking at it, and I use the word bodies in inverted commas because there is only one governing body in the RFL, the other is an organisation that looks after the interests of the clubs that play in their competition. But let's just say, for the ease of argument at the moment, two bodies that don't have the same aims. Can you move the sport forward? Rhetorical question.
Yeah, very much so. And I'm glad you said that, because who knows?
I mean, Tim did tweet us earlier asking about that. Might any rugby league clubs or the Super League RFL have any big picture football style restructure proposed up their sleeve? I think it'd be fair to say, Phil, we've been saying for months that this has been as you mentioned earlier, the perfect opportunity to do so for the future of the sport.
You'd hope so. I mean, I think there are a lot of people talking about, how we come out of this. But it is again, history tells you something. I go back to the early 90s. No, I go back. I'm going back to the early 1970s. Do a piece for the Leeds programme, which is still going, and again, every club that is producing any form of programme at the moment, I have nothing but the greatest admiration for them, and I think it's fantastic we've got a Wembley programme this weekend as well, and the RFL deserve massive credit for that. It's so hard to do something when you're asking people to subscribe or get money for something that they're not, ask for money for an event that they're not going to be at. And I think to still historically keep producing something is an absolute feather in their cap. And one of the pieces that I'm writing at the moment is about the decade. So it takes an individual decade and looks at what happened for the club, but also what was happening in the game at that time. And the 1970s is probably a close parallel to what's happening at the moment. So it was a decade that started with the game in turmoil and not really knowing where it was going, and ended with the start of a curve that ended up in a really positive place with big crowds at internationals and the sport really back on the map and producing some of the names that we're now still revering and a lot of commercial interest and coverage of the sport. And one of the reasons it happened, a catalyst, which you've always got to have, was something that came out in 1971 called the Kane Report. And the sport went outside of itself to a marketing agency in Manchester when marketing was barely defined in those days and said, tell us what you think of the sport. We've got some issues. We don't have huge crowds at the moment. We don't have a lot of interest commercially, and we seem to be struggling for our identity at the moment. We'll commission you to write a report. Now, the report that they wrote was quite damning, particularly of the image of the game. And what people thought were the stereotypes of the game. It was very, very critical of the BBC coverage, and particularly of Eddie Waring. But it split the administrators. There were some that said, how dare you from outside come in and tell us what we are and aren't and shouldn't be. And others went, well, actually, there's a way of perhaps taking some of this on board and saying, maybe the world has changed and we need to change a little bit with it. And one of the people who was a big advocate of the report was Salford, who at the time were just trailblazing a little bit with Friday night football at the Willows. And they got behind the report. What it did was very, very like Framing the Future. Very little of that report was ever implemented, but it was the catalyst for change. So Bill Fallowfield, who'd been the long-time secretary of the game, stepped down, and that led the way for David Oxley and David House to come in. And the clubs realised that actually they needed to take a step back and be led rather than try and do the leading. So maybe this is, again, it's a long, rambling, nonsensical statement, which is what I do a lot on this program and I apologize for. But what I'm saying is people have to sit down at some point and say, what do we want to be? And we'll throw some stuff out that is too far on the left edge, but actually by analyzing, not getting just through this time, but what we look like when we do get through this time. You have to do that now. Some of it has to be unpalatable, and some of it has to be probably over visionary in some respects, but you've got to do it. And I just pray and hope that we are doing it, because now is the time.
Well, let us pray and hope, because I think but do you then get them to look at what's happening as the here and now, or are we just looking at this as a temporary blocking on whatever's meant to be normally, when do you start calling this the actual normal, and therefore get together and say that this needs to be dealt with as a whole thing, rather than, so it's fine timing, isn't it, between do we do it straight away and jump in 2 feet in, or do you wait to see if this is what's going to happen next season as well?
Well, I think this is partly the debate about Toronto as well. That is it just about an investor who passes a test and we go, okay, well, thumbs up, thumbs down, carry on, don't carry on? Or do we say, well, actually, what we can possibly have by expanding to new markets, whether that be Toronto or Bristol, who've announced, their latest plans to set up a big academy down in the southwest, and their aim, and they're being quite brazen about it, is that they want that place in League One that they were supposed to have in whenever it was 2018, 2019, when the two clubs that were in League One were merged, and as a sport, what do we want? What do we say to Ottawa when they play their first game? What is, like we were talking about juniors and saying you've got to have a structured pathway. What is it for clubs? What do we expect from them? And you can do that whether there is money in the pot or a coronavirus outbreak, or whether you get through that to the other side. What are we going to look like? There's a huge amount of debate in rugby union about at the moment. Below the Premiership level, about, do clubs nowadays want to play a lot more local fixtures? Do they want to go back to taking some of the stress and pressure off the players in terms of travel? And is it more lucrative for certain clubs at a certain level to play predominantly local fixtures? Because that's the way they'll get more money over the counter. Now, it may well be that your upper echelon go global, if you like, and your lower echelon stay local. Now, again, if that's a model that we think works for us, then you can't necessarily just allow the evolution to take place on the field. You've got to put some measures in place that says this is what we want the thing to look like and how we think everybody can benefit from it, or you don't. But you've got to have that debate.
Yeah, and also there's so many variables that is it as simple as doing that? There's got to be the discussion, the debate. There's got to be the potential model of what will be. Then that's got to be reviewed. There's so many different angles that could come from that. I don't think it's of course, it's not as simple as maybe just make a decision together. But I don't know. Where's that? It's a bigger picture. Is there a whole group that that needs to be created that is actually just based on that, and what take them away from this season, take them away from anything that's happening, and get them completely that logistics, that whatever it might be, strategic management team, take them away from what's happening now and let them work on that. I don't know. It's I'm certainly glad it's not me making any decisions, that's for sure.
I still remember going to Wembley for the schools game, which is a highlight, not least for the kids themselves, who you've got the opportunity to play on the National Stadium. And it's not that long ago that we were seeing in the finals London schools, Southern schools, Welsh schools. Now, I'm not sure that development that we had at the time is at the same level that it was. I can remember, I can't remember if you were there, Rich. I think you probably were. There was a team from Surrey that beat a team from Castleford. And it wasn't just that they beat them, it was the manner in which they beat them. You were looking at kids that had such a great skill base that we were in awe. Now, it's just that time level where some of those kids should be playing now for London Broncos or London Scholars or whoever it might be, Oxford, Hemel if we still had them, whoever it might be. And I don't know whether we've lost those kids, and I don't know whether there's still that same interest right at the very bottom of the pyramid level, bringing talent in. Now, all of that should be part of this debate. We know we can do it. We've seen we can do it. But then
you've got the added extra that talent ID now is such a huge thing that boys were playing for these teams and that were, London teams coming through. Talent identification in schools now is so huge that I remember, we're talking maybe 18 years ago, I was asked to play volleyball because I was tall. I was asked to go into rowing. And that's when the talent ID started to come through. And it was never really defined now. But now, as a teacher, I know that there are people left, right and centre. Tube ball is huge, or handball, or, lacrosse, things that are. So do you have, therefore, is it a regional thing? Is it about opportunity? Is it about how affluent you are and not anymore? Is that a reason why? Or is it, where's the research to say, is it the sport itself that isn't attracting people? Or is it the fact that talent ID is much bigger now and much broader, and accessibility to different sports is 10 times bigger than it was 20 years ago? Don't know.
Might be less money in some of those sports now after the we did rubbish at the Olympics or whatever, or we lose some funding from somewhere. Ian's asked a question which kind of goes back to what we were talking about. What will happen to championship clubs if they can't play in front of crowds in the first half of next year? One assumes, Phil, it won't be very good if they can. Scottish football below the top levels resumed at the weekend. no crowds, having to stream games. They've had, I mean, Sid was upset with the hour league gap at the weekend for the whole KR game. They had problems in Scotland with their games, and I assume less people watching those than watching Hull, trying to watch Hull KR versus Catalan. So whether anyone will be wanting to pay money to stream Lee versus Swinton or whatever, or whether those clubs can continue without crowds and no sign of crowds coming back is the $64,000 question.
I think, again, that's why getting a policy at government level to combat the rise of infection at the moment is the most important thing. And whilst I agree with in a lot of respects and have great sympathy for the Let Fans In campaign, particularly when you see 400 people at the Albert Hall this week, which is an indoor, is nonsense. There is so many inconsistencies. I just think I look at Germany, for example, which had a similar rate of infection that we did at the same time that this was all becoming a major pandemic issue in Europe. And Germany have done something whereby now they have fans in stadia, and their rates of infection are very stable. It's still there, but they have it what would be deemed under control. And we haven't done that for some reason. We need to do that really quickly. And until we do that, nobody can answer your question about championship clubs and when crowds come back and how you survive without them, because it's too volatile an economic atmosphere. When furlough was an option, Championship and League One clubs can survive on the back of that. But if it isn't there, they're in the same boat as every other business of physically knowing how they're going to survive. I mean, retail is hanging on by a thread at the moment because Christmas is such a vital part of high street income, and nobody really knows whether footfall is going to be out there and in what aspect. So it's impossible to answer that question because we are no different to every other branch of the economy. What I would say is somebody please needs to get a handle on what it's going to take to bring the levels of infection down to the point where we can start letting people back into stadium. I also don't understand, and I appreciate it's probably a lack of intelligence issue on my part, that football below the professional level is allowing crowds back in. So if you go and see Yorkshire Amateurs, there might be 350 people in the ground, socially distanced and buying a pie and a pint and a programme. And it's possible that our Championship and League One clubs could survive on those numbers, at least in the short term. So again, I just think we need to monitor what other sports are doing that have got a very small amount of crowd in there. We need to obviously make a case for why our lower league clubs should also be allowed to operate that way, and we just need to hope there's some significant leadership that I don't see us having at the moment that is going to get this thing under control.
Yeah, lots to think about, hey?
Don't mention politics because people will get upset. I think it's Wakefield AFC who were founded last year. Play at whatever Post Office Road is called these days. I believe it's called the Millennium Stadium randomly. So they can, I think, have fans in to watch their games, a limited number. But if Featherstone Rovers were playing right now, then they obviously could not have any fans in. Other questions. So look, Stephen's asked us about the thoughts on the NRL final series so far. And then 6 in the negative. How far behind skill and fitness wise is Super League from the NRL? All the best players over there are ours. George Williams, he's great now.
Well, I don't know. That's what I mean. Like you go back to the start of the season and you're looking at when Roosters came over and how well Saints did, against them, and when Saints came back after the whole lockdown. I don't think they would have been too dissimilar in ability had they played that game again, because Saints have been absolutely firing. I think the way they play is very different. So the way the Super League and the NRL both play is so different that, yeah, there are, you can say that they seemingly are a little bit fitter and it's faster, and that's the style of that game, isn't it? Whereas we might focus more on the ruck area, or that side. I think it's a different angle to come at, but yeah, like you say, you've got how well are George and John Elliott and all that doing out there, and James Graham's come back from the NRL and he's still playing as well, as he was, if not maybe a little bit better. Has he stepped up because the level isn't as good, or is he just playing better because the style that we play in Super League is more suits him? I don't think that. I think the NRL is always going to be ahead of us in the sense that it's a bigger spectacle. It's the national sport. It's just incredible. The size of the stadiums and the crowds and everything like that. The whole generic parcel that is the NRL. But I think in terms of skill and fitness, there's a couple of our Super League teams that could definitely give it a good go. I'm not saying they'd be as successful, but I don't think they'd look too out of place.
Certainly not against Brisbane, Phil.
Yeah.
No.
What about it next year?
Brisbane in Christ, man.
There are two distinct questions here. One is, how do we compare against the NRL? And I reckon nothing's changed since the last time we won a Test series. That we've got to decide what we want to be. We play too many games and we ask too much of our players. And if our players played the same number of games as their NRL counterparts and we went with quality rather than quantity, the gap wouldn't seem as huge as it is. I think the access to athletes is completely different. That if you are a talented young kid in certainly 2 states, where most of the population is based, rugby league is a first choice sport. You see if you're good enough to play league, and if not, you play football. Here it's the other way around. So we've got to play to our strengths, and they do have access to a greater talent pool. They've got the Pacific Islands nearby that are producing a huge amount of their players. I think a quarter of the players come from the Pacific Islands. So, we aren't comparing like with like, but I think if we played the same number of games and had a greater intensity in our domestic competition, we wouldn't be as far away as you think they are, which is seen by the fact that, 2 of our kids that have only played predominantly academy rugby league, Dom Young and Harry Rushton, are going over to the NRL. They've seen the potential of our kids. We are producing talent. And I think if you put certainly the top 4 of our clubs in the NRL, they wouldn't come bottom. Because if they played at that level of intensity every single week, played 1 game a week and could prepare in the same way that the NRL clubs do, they'd do all right. We just don't have that same depth of quality that they do. That's one issue, but that's not changed. And we don't seem to want to be prepared to do anything about that. We just want to cram in as many games as we can and play a cup competition as well that they don't play. In terms of their playoff series, it's been outstanding. I mean, absolutely. We get to the playoffs and fans stop watching. They get to the playoffs and it goes up a level. I think we've been privileged to see a couple of games. Penrith against the Roosters was just next level stuff. Couldn't take your eyes off it. Immensely high quality, and people that genuinely think that the NRL is still 5 drives and a kick, give your head a shake. Watch what's going on. The way Canberra and the Roosters went at it this week in an elimination game, absolutely astonishing. There are 4 teams left, and if you're asking at the moment who is the favourite, impossible to say. Penrith is a form team, but nobody wants to back against Souths, who've come good at the right time and have got a coach who's been there, done that, knows how to prepare his team. You got Melbourne, who are the side that arguably is the one that everybody else is frightened of. Because they just know how to win, and we might almost be talking about Cameron Smith's farewell, and if that doesn't galvanise a team, nothing will. Against Canberra, who got, like a bit like Salford this weekend, got to a grand final last year, believe in themselves, I'm terrible at predictions anyway, as you know, on a week-to-week basis. But I could not pick who was going to win this. We got 4 teams left, and we don't know who's going to win. How fantastic! Absolutely brilliant. Don't compare it with us. Just enjoy it for what it is.
We're only going to do one prediction anyway this week, because the midweek Super League games are just kind of in the way, like we said earlier. One last question before I move on to something else. Music Max says, have you got any thoughts on the Hull FC coaching situation? After the initial speculation, things seem to be very quiet. Yeah, the Goldfish Bowl over in Humberside, East Yorkshire, whatever I'm supposed to call it, has gone a bit quiet, Phil.
I think there was interest in Stephen Kearney, bringing him back for a lot of reasons. That A, he's a good coach, and B, clearly played for Hull, and the fans would like that kind of appointment, I think. That obviously now isn't going to happen because he's going to be an assistant again at Melbourne. I still think there is going to be a change in the coaching ranks at Hull. Now, whether that's bringing in a director of rugby that's going to help out Andy Last, who's relatively inexperienced, or whether it's going to be, Andy, we really like you and we like what you're doing, but we think we need to bring another head coach in who's perhaps a little bit more experienced. I think Hull's issues are more about recruitment than who coaches. But I still think there will be change at Hull. It's just a very difficult time to do anything at the moment because money is tight.
Money is certainly tight. Elsewhere, news today that the RFL Operational Rules Tribunal has found Ed Barber of Halifax guilty of the breach of the social media code of conduct and the respect policy. He's been fined £1,000, with £750 of that being suspended until the end of 2021. A reprimand has been entered on his disciplinary record. His punishment, he says, scrolling around so I can read, has, however, been mitigated by his contrition, which included volunteering for educational courses on inclusion and diversity. If you can't remember what he did, he sent out a tweet on July the 30th, which was found by the tribunal to have contained unacceptable behaviour and language, which by implication, there's a key word there, targeted individuals or groups on the ground of ethnic origin and or religion. I've seen people today saying, yeah, but you're adding the dots together for that implication. And I would say to them, yes, but you'd have to be bloody stupid to have not worked out what he was implying in that tweet at that time of the COVID crisis and what he was implying about those areas where people came from. But that would just be me. And obviously the RFL agree on that. So hopefully the lesson here, can't stop people being stupid, but we can stop people being stupid on social media because it'll cost you at least £250. At least. But all the players, Dan Sargent, he's not guilty of whatever he did at the weekend, and Tom Holroyd, as we mentioned earlier, so they will be free to play at Wembley if required. Before we look at the Challenge Cup final, just for prediction purposes, a year ago, Danika, we were in the tunnel at the Totally Wicked Stadium having a deep and meaningful conversation about all things Leeds Rhinos beating Castlewood Tigers in the grand final. A headline-making day for many reasons. There's a unicorn. I keep being distracted by the unicorn. Obviously, that was, having your team, obviously you didn't play in the final the year before, but lost narrowly in the final the year before, got back, won the Challenge Cup, won the grand final as underdogs, which doesn't always happen to Leeds. What are your memories of that day a year on, and the memories of that day?
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? Because I've been asked about this a couple of times this week, and then I saw the interview that you and I did. I think I saw that this morning, and my memory of it from when I got asked on Saturday morning versus this morning is completely different. I remember it being a bit weird and a bit tense, just purely because it was a Friday night. Everyone was complaining about where it was, and rather than looking at the bigger picture, I'd have to work in the morning anyway. So I had to go teach in the morning and then left work early to go and get prepped. So we didn't have the same prep as normal. Went over and, that cliche thing we talked about earlier. Say it's just another game, but it wasn't. It was on Sky. It was on Sky, and then there was a whole nother. It's like you say about the referees having to go and just ref the games with the new rules. It's like nobody preps you for what it's like being on TV on Sky, and how we'd given the shout to go out the tunnel, and we went to walk out. And like, no, Sky's not ready for you yet. And it was always like, oh, that's another spin of like. And I remember it being a spectacle. And I remember when we did finally walk out the tunnel, and the fire cannons and the guards of honor and whatever, and the mascots and the lining up, and just there was a little bit of extra all the time. And every now and then you're like, oh yeah, remember in the final. And I remember it being, we've been in the Challenge Cup final, and that was such an amazing day. And I think whether it was because it was Friday night, it was an evening game, I don't know. I remember it just being very tense, where the Challenge Cup game, we played very much as a squad, and I remember the grand final being quite tense between us, and whether that being, but I think we were two tries down, weren't we, very, very quickly, and whether it was that or not. But I remember not remembering the final whistle go, and then somebody saying it's over and Tasha taking it in, and then there was a fine line between the euphoria of winning a grand final and how great the whole occasion was, and we were on Sky, and Fran was being pulled for a man of the match speech, and then being given the check for that we hadn't been prepped about. Like, nobody said that if you get man of the match, you get a check to give your chosen charity. Lots of things now that I think retrospectively I can think about, and I just remember. And I don't ever really remember the game. It's like you say earlier, as soon as that kickoff goes, you're in that zone and you play that game, and you've got a job to do, you've got a role to do. But yeah, I remember it being, and then there was a big focus on the girls because they were leaving to Sydney to play in the nines the day after. I just remember thinking that like it was a real pinnacle moment in women's rugby. We'd obviously won and that was fantastic, but I think it was just that real pinnacle moment in women's rugby. We were on Sky, but everything the men would have had, in terms of how the pre-match, post-match was run. I remember just being really proud of the sport in general. I know that sounds really cliche, and I think that's, it's been a year yesterday since I last played a game of rugby, which is just insane. So it's kind of bittersweet in the sense that I remember it so fondly, and I remember how great the game was, where we'd got to, where we were moving to. Betfred had come on. We'd have to rush and get Betfred put on our shirts for the sponsors. So I think maybe a very whimsical way that I look at it, rather than we were Leeds Rhinos, we won the grand final, whoop-de-doo type of, if that makes sense to you. But yeah, what a great occasion that was. What a great occasion. And Kelsey Gentles from Cash, she retweeted some of her pictures out, and despite losing, she said, what an experience and what a step forward. And I think that's now what we look at, because we haven't had anything this year. So yeah, I'd do it all again right now.
Nothing else happened on that day. Nothing else happened. It was all right.
I mean, I'm a positively focused woman. I found my zen today, so I don't want to ruin my zen. I've got my unicorn, I've got my zen, I'm in a happy place. I'm being whimsical and reminiscing about all the wonderful things that used to be women's rugby.
Now,
you've got pre-season to look forward to as well, and the pain that comes with it.
2 weeks tomorrow.
now, secretly, obviously, you want to be out on that field, but I'm guessing 2021, new season, new year, new kit. So you won't have to wear that yellow one.
Well, I don't know. Maybe we'll have to. We haven't worn it yet. Who knows?
Collector's item. Has it got the champions badge on like St Helens have?
I don't think so.
No, we'll start the campaign. We'll get on to whoever it is at Betfred or the RFL to get you special badges on your shirt. That'll really wind up all the other teams as well.
Do you know what? Should we just get back to, literally, honestly, I'd go back to playing just on the field, at the local rec at the minute. So just want to get the game back and get training with the girls and get playing some sport again. I've had some really I've got some friends at school who have been trying to keep me in check, and we've been playing tennis and badminton. Unfortunately, I have to say, neither of which I'll be taken up in retirement. Badminton maybe, but I've got some friends that are trying to keep me sane with some sport. So I've said to them, trying to play a bit of touch rugby, but it's been boycotted somewhat. So any kind of arranged sport, organised sport would be wonderful.
I wouldn't get in the way of one of your first serves.
I mean, I can't really serve very well I'm much better at badminton.
I can imagine the venom that is behind it.
Well, I play with a wonderful woman at school, Rochelle, and who is a little bit older than me, should we say. I call her my mum at school. And I was playing against her, and she was like, take it easy, but actually she's the one with the wicked serve and the wicked shot. So, yeah, I'm not very coordinated when it comes to rackets and shuttles and balls and stuff. So it's not really a problem I have to think about. But yeah, anything organised would be wonderful. And we had that thing during lockdown, didn't we, where Sky kept on playing highlights of the final. So, what was?
Glory days. I mean, at least now you've picked up a tennis racket. I believe you're ranked in the British top 10 there. So congratulations on that.
Well, there you know.
An old joke there for the.
I still get it though.
As we, there's nothing. Have I forgotten anything, Phil? I know there's games in midweek, but they're on telly. I'll watch them and so on and so. I'm really going to wait if you're playing St Helens again. That's good. I don't know how.
Another week, another Wakefield St Helens game.
How do the fixtures work this out? I don't know. The Challenge Cup final on Saturday. Brief predictions of. First of all, the Lansford Trophy, which of course named after someone very prophetic this year, having managed Salford in that final. They won in 1930 something or other, and they could win it again this year. First time Wembley since 1969. Who's going to be the key player on Saturday?
Kev Brown.
He said asking us before the squads have been picked after the midweek game.
Before anyone gets injured for Salford tomorrow, fingers crossed they don't, obviously.
I'm going to go Kev Brown, Luke Gale.
It's not going to be it's never a forward, apart from that year Jeff Lima won it randomly.
No, and that's fine.
I'm going to go Cruz Leeming.
Oh, nice.
I think just the way the rules have changed, hookers now are absolutely germane to how a team plays, and the one that gets on top will, I think, determine the outcome. And just been really impressed with him.
The Brooklyn Beckham of rugby league.
And anybody named Cruz, there's a story there.
Leeds cruise to victory, that kind of thing. Yeah,
nice. I like it.
Yeah,
I like it.
Well, I mean, if that's on the front of League Express next week, I'll be asking for royalties. Who's going to win? He asks for a pair of Leeds Rhinos.
Leeds. It's going to be tight. Yeah. It's going to be 2018 Leeds.
I'm not having these Leeds fans saying, "Oh, I don't mind if Salford win." No, we're not having any of that. No.
2018 Leeds. There you go. That's me.
As we sit here on Monday night, not knowing who is going to be the final.
Don't be all philosophical, Phil. Just give us your predictions. Come on.
My prediction is, because clearly I'm not going to say who's going to win, because everybody knows who I'm going to say is going to win, and so it's worthless. What I will say is I think this is a fantastic opportunity for the sport this weekend. I genuinely do think that there will be a spectacle. I'm particularly pleased that the two coaches play a certain way. I don't think we're going to be worrying about who's winning the wrestle in the middle of the field. It's clearly a very important part of the sport, and attention to that will be paid. But I think we've got two people at the helm that see rugby league is played a certain way, and that entertainment principle that characterises the sport is first and foremost. So clearly I'm going to predict Leeds win, but I wouldn't I, if they were in the third division, I'd predict that Leeds were going to win. But I just think we are going to get the spectacle that is going to cheer everybody up. I think we're going to get an open game. I think we're going to get some points. I think we're going to see some spectacular tries. I think Leeds might edge it, but actually I just think it is one of those occasions whereby we're all going to sit back and go, I'm really glad we're rugby league fans. I think there's a huge wave of emotion about the Rugborough documentary as well. I think enough of that has now been seen on clips in social media that even though we haven't seen it yet, we know what it's going to contain. And I think, again, that's going to be replayed before the final starts. I think you add that and the values of the sport and of particularly him and his family to what I think and I hope we're going to see after it. It just could be a big weekend for rugby league, and that's what I hope more than anything. And Leeds win, clearly.
Rugby league is the winner. Rugby league is the winner. I mean, the good news is I've just checked to see what else is on telly on Saturday afternoon. And you've got the Merseyside derby, obviously in the Premier League, and in Scotland you've got the Old Firm derby as well, but they're on before the Challenge Cup final, and obviously not on BBC One either. So hopefully a lot of people do tune in and watch, and hopefully it's a great game. And Rugby League is the winner. Brackets and Salford. He says for balance. Danika, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Start your column now. That's my advice for next month. If you can't think of anything to write, I just sit there and start with a thought, and then
I'll tell everybody how bad pre-season feels on the lungs when you've had 8 weeks off.
Yeah, there you go. In descriptive terms. Phil, the magazine is out this week.
Yeah, hopefully it would have been nice if people could read it on their way to Wembley. They can now read it instead of going to Wembley. So watch the game, read the mag. Everybody's happy.
And a magazine subscription, the perfect gift this Christmas time, which has now started. Christmas has started, obviously. Phil, thank you. Are you going to? Are you allowed in, or are you?
I am hoping to. Yes. Yeah. So fingers crossed, all being well. Hopefully we'll be there reporting it for. I admit we're in an extremely privileged position reporting it for those who can't be there. We'll try and do our best.
Well, I'll be watching on the telly. I'll try and look for you. Danika will be watching as well, obviously.
Yeah.
We got
just for you, Phil.
hopefully they show you in the crowd among all the dignitaries there. I mean, I'm assuming Prince Harry's not there to shake hands, so hopefully they'll let you on the pitch to do that before. Well, you can't do that either, can you?
No.
No. Oh, well, at least we get to see
we'll take our own pack up.
Yeah. I mean, I'm assuming Scully's not there because they won't have any hospitality this year, will they? So
if I can't be in the royal box, I'm not going.
He'll be singing the national anthem at home. But there you go. Danika, thank you. Phil,
thank you.
We will be back at some point. Plenty of build to come on the channel, and we'll be back next Monday, hopefully, to review what will be a unique Coral Challenge Cup.